At 75 years old, King Charles has finally done something no one thought he would ever do. For decades, he carried the weight of whispered rumors, unresolved tensions, and the legacy of one woman who defined his life as much as his crown ever could. The world has always seen Charles as the boy who grew into a man under the harshest scrutiny. But only now, at this late stage of his life, has he revealed the confession that changes everything we thought we knew about him. This wasn't just a political statement. It wasn't about the monarchy, tradition, or royal duty. It was about his deepest regret, the one truth that haunted him through every chapter of his journey. What he finally admitted left the palace stunned, the public divided, and the future of the monarchy under a cloud of reflection. But to understand how Charles reached this point of honesty, we have to go back to the very beginning, to the boy who was never supposed to survive the crown. Charles Philip Arthur. George was born in November 1948. The nation rejoiced. The palace celebrated, and headlines announced the arrival of the heir to the throne. On the surface, it was a perfect beginning. But behind palace walls, there was another narrative, one that would shape his life forever. Unlike his mother, who was strong-willed and composed even as a young queen, Charles was quiet, thoughtful, and reserved. He had a sensitivity about him that, in most families, might have been seen as a gift. But in the rigid, unyielding world of royalty, softness was branded weakness. His father, Prince Philip, was a man shaped by naval discipline and hardship. He worried constantly about whether Charles had what it would take to lead. To toughen him up, Philip sent his son to Gordonstown, a boarding school in Scotland infamous for its punishing rules and brutal culture. For Charles, the experience was devastating. He was bullied relentlessly, isolated from friends, and made to feel as though his natural temperament was something to be ashamed of. Years later, Charles would quietly admit that Gordonstown nearly broke him. And yet, in those lonely, painful years, one relationship gave him strength. His sister, Princess Anne. Anne understood him. In her presence, Charles could laugh, relax, and feel, for a moment, like he belonged. Their unusual closeness in a family that rarely showed emotion kept him afloat during those dark school years. Without it, he might never have endured. Ironically, the very sensitivity that made him a target of mockery was also what gave him resilience. Charles learned to carry pain without turning bitter. And while others doubted him, he developed the quiet ability to endure. But even as he grew into adulthood, doubts about his strength never truly faded. When Charles entered military training with the Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy, many assumed he would falter. After all, the sensitive boy mocked at school didn't fit the image of a hardened soldier. Yet Charles proved them wrong. He applied himself with focus, excelling in both physical training and academics. Instructors were impressed by his determination, and he earned respect among his peers. For a brief moment, critics were forced to acknowledge that beneath his quiet demeanor, Charles had steel. But while his professional achievements silenced some voices, the scars from his upbringing never left him. What he longed for most wasn't medals or applause. It was warmth, love, and understanding. Those things had been scarce in his childhood, and as he grew older, the absence only deepened. That hunger for love would define the next, and most controversial, chapter of his life. To the world, Charles's courtship with Lady Diana Spencer was a storybook romance. She was young, beautiful, and adored by the public. Their wedding in July 1981 became a global event. More than 750 million people tuned in, convinced they were witnessing a fairy tale. But inside the palace, the truth was already fractured. Their courtship had been shockingly brief, only 13 dates before Charles proposed. For Diana, then barely 20 years old, it felt like destiny. For Charles, it was more complicated. Diana soon discovered something that shattered her dreams. Tucked away was a bracelet Charles had commissioned, engraved with secret nicknames, Fred and Gladys. But the bracelet wasn't for her. It was for Camilla Parker Bowles, the woman who had already held his heart for years. On the night before their wedding, Diana's worst fears were confirmed. Charles confessed that he didn't truly love her. His heart, he admitted, belonged to someone else. He was marrying her not out of passion, but out of duty. For a 20-year-old bride, hours away from marrying the future king, it was devastating. She cried alone, but the machinery of monarchy had already set the stage. There was no escape. The next morning, the world cheered as Diana stepped into St. Paul's Cathedral in her ivory gown. But behind her smile was heartbreak, and behind Charles's stiff composure was the weight of a confession that had ended the fairy tale before it began. The signs were visible, even on the wedding day. Diana refused to vow obedience, a subtle rebellion against tradition. Charles stumbled over his words, and their balcony kiss was awkward, distant, and lacking warmth. What should have been a new beginning was already crumbling. On their honeymoon, Diana felt ignored as Charles spent more time reading and sketching than paying attention to her. In their first interview as a couple, Diana quickly affirmed they were in love. But Charles famously shrugged and replied, "Whatever love means." The world laughed nervously, but Diana was cut to the core. That remark told her everything, that her marriage was rooted in duty, not love. And in the background, Camilla never went away. Camilla Parker Bowles was the constant thread in Charles's life. She was not glamorous like Diana, but she understood him in a way no one else did. With her, Charles could laugh until his stomach hurt and speak openly about the pressures of his role. Diana knew this, and it haunted her. She eventually confronted Camilla at a private event, begging her to leave Charles alone. Camilla's reply was cruelly dismissive. Diana already had everything: a husband, children, fame. Why couldn't she let Charles keep his one source of happiness? That remark confirmed what Diana feared most. Camilla would never step aside. By the early 1990s, the rumors had exploded into public scandal. The infamous Tampongate phone call between Charles and Camilla leaked, exposing their intimacy in humiliating detail. Overnight, Charles became a national punchline. Diana, meanwhile, captured the world's sympathy. And then came Diana's unforgettable interview, where she said the words that would echo for decades. "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. It was the moment that shattered the monarchy's carefully curated image. While Charles's reputation crumbled, Diana's only grew stronger. She reinvented herself as a humanitarian icon. She held the hands of AIDS patients when the world was still afraid to touch them. She walked through minefields, hugged orphans, and became the most beloved royal of her time. The palace worried about her independence. But the public adored her, seeing her as the Queen of Hearts. Just as Diana was beginning to rebuild her life after separation, tragedy struck. On August 31, 1997, Diana was killed in a car crash in Paris. The world froze. Crowds wept openly. Mountains of flowers piled outside Buckingham Palace. But the royal family's silence in those early days fueled public anger. Where was the statement? Where was the emotion? The Queen and Charles stayed in Balmoral with William and Harry, a decision many saw as cold indifference. When Charles finally walked behind Diana's coffin with his sons, the world saw grief, but also the weight of blame. For millions, Charles was the man who had broken Diana's heart, and now her absence made him the symbol of everything she had endured. Diana's death transformed her into legend, while Charles was left with regret that would shadow him for the rest of his life. For years, Charles tried to move forward with Camilla. Slowly, the public began to accept their relationship, but comparisons to Diana never disappeared. Every headline reminded him of the woman he had lost, not just as a wife, but as someone he had failed to protect. As Charles aged, reports suggest he began to reflect more openly on his regrets. Insiders have said he confessed to friends that he wished he had treated Diana differently, that he should have valued her kindness more, and that he failed to give her the love she deserved. The revelation of his cancer diagnosis has only deepened that sense of reflection. Now facing his own mortality, Charles has shifted his focus. Less on duty, more on redemption. And it was in that mindset that he made the confession that shocked the world. For decades, Charles avoided addressing the truth directly. But in recent conversations and reflections, he finally admitted what had always been whispered. He did not love Diana in the way she loved him. This wasn't about politics, scandals, or affairs. It was about a personal failure. Charles acknowledged that his marriage to Diana was built on duty, not passion, and that he failed her as a husband. For a man who has lived his entire life behind the walls of royal protocol, this admission was seismic. It was a confession not of weakness, but of guilt. It was the recognition that the woman the world adored, the one he hurt the most, was extraordinary, and he had not cherished her as he should have. In admitting this, Charles didn't erase the past. He didn't win forgiveness from everyone, but he did something rare for a monarch. He showed humanity. From the boy branded too soft to the man crowned king, Charles has lived under a shadow of doubt. His sensitivity was once mocked, yet it became the force behind his environmental advocacy and his humanitarian efforts. But even those achievements cannot erase his greatest regret. At 75, King Charles's confession has rewritten his story. His legacy will not be defined solely by his crown, but by the woman he failed, the love he lost, and the truth he finally admitted. So the question remains, is this confession a sign of redemption? Or is it too late for the king to escape Diana's shadow? What do you think? Is Charles's regret genuine, or is it just another royal attempt to rewrite history? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Because if there's one thing this story shows us, it's that even kings cannot escape the weight of the past.